Hello, everyone. Welcome to Interior Analysis. I'm Angel Michelli,
I'm Evan Westman.
I'm Jelani T. Kelly.
and today we are talking about 2007 Sunshine, directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, who wrote Ex Machina. This is my pick, and I'm pretty excited to talk about this one. It's not necessarily like one of my favorite sci-fi movies. It's a good cast with a good mash of different sci-fi concepts and good music and visuals and stuff. So I don't know. I thought it would be a good way to kind of cap off our sci-fi trilogy. So I want to hear what you guys think first before we get into everything. So Evan, what do you think of this?
Yeah, so this was my first time. I had heard, and I won't talk too much about this since it's your topic. I had been, I guess, spoiled that this basically turns into a monster movie or a slasher halfway through, so I was kind of bracing myself for that. Alex Garland movies tend to fall on a pretty broad spectrum for me. Ex Machina is like pretty top tier. Civil War from this past year, I really liked. Annihilation, parts of it are pretty good, other parts are a little frustrating, and then I find 28 Days Later incredibly boring. This fell closest to Annihilation. I think the first half's really solid, and then the second half is pretty frustrating, and I kind of checked out. I will say The Sun is a good movie monster. I don't think it's worth turning into a topic, but I was like, surprisingly good movie monster.
That'll contrast what I have to say about it in a second. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Setting up conflict early. I've noticed two things. One is just for our sci-fi trilogy, I realized we kind of accidentally had a theme of humanity dealing with a climate crisis, and two of them have Chris Evans. We kind of said we were going into this without a theme, but I guess we sort of had one. And then this movie low-key predicts 3 future movies. Chris Evans gets frozen at the end. Cillian Murphy has to drop a nuke that determines the future of humanity. And the second half, I feel like, is basically Prometheus, which also has Benedict Wong. So I was kind of like, oh, this feels a little familiar, but that's not this movie's fault, because all of those came out after. And then, other final note that's just kind of irrelevant, I think the, big swelling score from this movie is used in the X-Men Days of Future Past trailer.
Oh, it totally
Pretty sure
is.
I
It absolutely
recognized
is.
it.
As soon as I watched this again, I realized that that's where I was hearing it from. It pulled me out of it for a sec, but again, not this movie's fault. It's because X-Men used it later.
Mm-hmm. I just happened to encounter it first.
This movie walks so a bunch of others could run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think that's fair to
pretty
say.
much.
This is my first time watching this movie. I've kind of always wanted to see it because years ago I saw a trailer for it where the music for the trailer was Lux Eterna, aka that scary ass theme from Requiem for a Dream. Song I'm deeply fascinated but also terrified of. Kind of like the Final Destination franchise. It looked like the movie was being marketed as a space horror, because I remember one of the taglines being like something came back with them. So the entire movie I was kind of waiting for it to get to that point, kind of like Evan. Boy, was I not ready for that reveal though. I saw the actual minute trailer, and then there was a 5-minute version that kind of just spoiled the whole movie. Both had the Lux Eterna song in it, but the longer one had the reveal that something was there with them. That scene where Icarus told Kappa there were 5 passengers, not 4, I was just like, I knew this was coming. This is still freaky. The build up to it, the way it's revealed, the way it's shot with just pure darkness behind him in that room, it was well done. The conflict with what Evan said about the sun being a movie monster. I watched a Film Comics Explained video on this after I watched it to see if I wasn't understanding anything from the movie, and the only thing that I didn't recognize was the parallels between God and the devil. The sun being God. So Evan just called God a monster, everybody. The devil being...
Sorry, I didn't realize. I nobody told me Apollo was real.
The devil being Pinbacker. That video also mentioned the movie was bleak, and that was the word I'd use for my for my feelings after watching it. I feel like it wanted to be bittersweet, but that didn't hit for me. Once it got to Planet Earth and it showed the sun being bright and Cillian Murphy's narration was playing over that part, I was like, it feels like it's trying to end on a hopeful beat, but I just watched Chris Evans simultaneously freeze to death and bleed out in a coolant tank. So, yeah, that didn't hit.
It felt like a very 2000s ending, though. I feel like there were a few movies. Maybe I'm just thinking of 28
Yeah,
Days Later.
this movie feels very 2007. Like, it's got, like, elements of, like, that I Am Legend where there's a lot of... It's well done throughout, but there are points where it's just, like, very bleak, and it wants it to be, like, hopeful, but also, like, super dark.
All it's missing is What I've Done by Linkin Park to make it the most 2007 ending.
That should have been for the trailer.
I guarantee you there's an edit that has that in, and I'm positive that there is.
That's been put at the end of like every movie, so I'm sure somebody's
It really
done it
has.
by now.
I think I saw one for the end the end of Inception, which is hilarious.
Yeah. There's some really good ones. I think one of my favorites was Jurassic World. I don't like that movie, but like it kind of works. It works at the end of like everything is what's funny. It still goes hard no matter what the last shot is.
I want them to do ones where they also add in Optimus Prime's voiceover from Transformers 1, like to a movie about like the Declaration of Independence.
Steam
Like an
coming out the
old-timey,
kettle.
yeah, like an old-timey movie. And they just add it in, and no one knows where it's coming from, and people are looking around like they can hear it.
I think that would be really good at the end of like how at the end of every 2000s animated movie there was like the dance party with all the characters. If you put that under it, it's just so clashing.
The song
Like the
choice
end
for
of
the end of
Shrek
this
2.
the song choice for the end of this movie was jarring to me because I was just like, this doesn't fit with the rest of the movie and what we just ended on.
What
It was
what
something like-
was the song?
What was the song choice again? I forgot.
I don't remember. It was something
I'll look
loud.
it up.
In some ways, you can make the argument for that with like The Matrix. Like in a way, it's a lot louder than the rest of the movie music in that, but it does still work. I guess because it fits with the theme or whatever. But yes, sometimes movies just be doing that. Like they throw in like some random ass crazy song at the end. There was one that was like really jarring recently. Oh, Longlegs did that. I guess going for like a weird uncanny feeling type song, but it was one of those like almost like a family song, but like a happier song, I guess, to juxtapose how dark the ending was. It was a little jarring. It felt a little weird.
But after seeing Chris Evans simultaneously freeze to death and bleed out, I needed a cleanser in the form of a Marvel movie where he's not dying. But 2 weeks ago, I had just watched The Winter Soldier and then Civil War the following night, so I didn't want to rewatch those again. So I watched Iron Man instead, and it did the job. I forgot how good that movie was. But yeah, I don't think I need to see this movie again. Like, ever. It was really depressing.
I wish I wanted to rewatch it more. If you have more notes, go ahead. Just
one more. I'd ask where the black people are at in this movie, but knowing everyone dies, I'm not too hung up on it. Plus, Icarus is voiced by a black woman, so that's cool.
Yeah.
So it doesn't technically die, I guess.
Well, both ships.
Doesn't the ship... I feel like the ship blows up, probably.
Well, okay. One of the ships blows up, but the other...
Well, I don't know, because
doesn't?
it has to go back. Would they even be able to send it back if everyone on the ship is dead?
That's true. Yeah, I felt like it didn't matter at that point because, yeah, they're all off of it. It's probably just going to go hit Venus or something.
Well, it matters if we want to know if Icarus is alive or not.
I don't think the first one is, because...
First one,
I don't know
no.
how they get it back online. Second one, I didn't know what was happening in the final act, so I don't know whether the ship blew up or whether they were inside the bomb itself. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, that's part of why I'm glad I watched it twice, because it gave it a little more clarity. I think the big thing at the end is like some kind of bomb activation room or chamber or something.
The camera was shaky and hazy for half of it, so I didn't know.
Yeah. Half of it was on Mark Strong's face.
I'll save my thoughts on that for Angel's topic, but
Yeah.
wasn't a fan.
Yeah. So I think that I feel like similarly to you guys in a lot of ways. Like, it was the first time in years I watched this movie. I remembered it hitting differently last time, but I think that might have been because of the cast. Like, the cast is so good, and like, Jelana, you were saying, there's only one face you didn't recognize, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's probably the comms guy, because he's the only one that I didn't recognize. Everyone else is in this movie, and I feel like that's now the draw, like, years after it came out. And it's funny, because, like, I was watching it, and only some of them really get a chance to perform. Like, I feel like Chris Evans gets a big spotlight. Cliff Curtis does a really good job.
Is it Michelle Yeoh? She doesn't get to do much.
Yeah, that's the thing. Michelle Yeoh, you have Michelle Yeoh in your movie. She doesn't get to do much. Rose Byrne doesn't really get to do a lot. Benedict Wong gets like a moment or two. And I don't want to say the cast feels wasted because I feel like everyone does kind of get like either a moment or like character dynamics between them. But for me, I felt like based on the setup, that was going to kind of be the draw of the movie. And then, like we were saying, it kind of just by the end, like, which is my topic, we'll get to that, but it just kind of tonally shifts a lot. And I don't know, by then just been so much misery, I feel like, throughout the whole thing that it just kind of felt like it almost didn't hit me the way that it would have in like another movie where other things had happened. But they're definitely going for like a bittersweet tone because they've got like speeches about how beautiful the sun is and how it like takes you in, but then everything is also kind of like oddly bright and eerily dark at the same time. The second time I watched it for this, I had a little more clarity on like at least what was going on. But that was when I realized like a lot of it isn't really character moments. A lot of it is very plot driven. It feels like, which isn't how I remember it the first time. I remembered more of the vibes and the atmosphere of it. But if you really look at what's going on, a lot of the decisions are very plot heavy. It's a lot of like, we need to move, we need to complete the mission, we need to do this, this is the next step, this is the step after that. We don't really get to know anybody as people, except for like maybe Mace to an extent, but even then it's through, again, there's a lot of it's through the lens of like the mission, so I don't know. I'm glad that I picked this and we can check it out again and talk about it, but it feels elevated in some parts and like mid-ish in some other parts. But I wanted to start with Evan's topic because Evan, your topic was sci-fi set pieces, right?
Yeah, my topic is sci-fi set pieces, and this is going to be where I am definitely the most complimentary. We'll get into more of the things I didn't like in the other topics. I've mentioned before, the first half of this movie, I really liked. If the whole movie was like that, this would be much better in my book. And I thought the highlights, the scenes that are probably going to stick with me, are the two big set pieces of when they go out onto the reflector shield and when they launch from one airlock to the other. There's just some like good tension scene writing in there. They both have well-established threats of danger. They have multiple characters in danger, which I think is a pretty big factor for tension. There's clear locations of safety and danger. The characters are being smart to maximize the probability of success. And the shield sequence, especially, I think is great because it uses elements that are unique to this movie. Like, this is a different design for a spaceship than we've seen because of the mission they're on. Sunlight is not a thing that's dangerous in almost any other situation, except, I guess, with vampires. For the airlock scene, like, we have seen a bunch of tense airlock space scenes in other sci-fi movies. We just had one in Interstellar in the last episode. But I feel like this one adds a pretty fun twist to it, where, like, you're sending two people without spacesuits into space, and it's a pretty short distance that they're traveling, but we know, just because we know how space works, how much can go wrong and how much has to go space. But yep, they're in space, so if they make a mistake, it's over.
Space mistakes.
And I like that for both of them, both sequences, at least one person survives and at least one person dies, because it helps add to the stakes. There's still characters with plot armor. Like, I was never that worried that Cillian Murphy, was going to die in either one, because
you kind of know he's going to make it to the end, or you at least have a feeling that like somebody has to. It's going to be him.
But it still adds to the tension. I mean, you're not worried for him at all, really, in the airlock scene, because he's the one with the spacesuit on, and they delegate it before. Like, I thought that was kind of an interesting element as well in both cases. Was every crew member like knows that they might not make it back from from the mission, so they sort of have a hierarchy of like who is the most important person to survive for the success of the mission, which is interesting. And I'm kind of glad that they don't really deviate from that too much, where nobody's like trying to argue for their importance because they just don't want to die.
Well, only Harvey
You
does.
have that one moment, and that's actually something I want to talk about too. With
Harvey.
when after he becomes the captain, that the
Mm-hmm.
comms guy.
That's true. But I feel like other movies like that feels like a thing we've seen before, and that was kind of part of what I liked about the first half of this was like it's leaning into and embracing the sci-fi elements more. You want your characters to feel like humans, but when you're dealing with like people who are in a situation where they've kind of been chosen for their pragmatism and their skills, you kind of just, as an audience member, I feel like I don't want them to be just like everyone else wanting to survive. I kind of prefer that more pragmatic approach to a situation. That might just be me. That was most of my notes. I have one more, but what did you guys think of those sequences? Or are you fans?
Well, I love the airlock sequence. I know you were pointing out that one. Like, just it's very creative the way that they do it. Like, you can see how fast they're thinking, especially Mace, and that's one of several moments where you really see his character. He probably has the most consistent character in that, like, he might hate Kappa, but he knows that Kappa is the most important person there for the mission. So he sends him back. And the other guy is the one who's like, I'm the captain, we can't run without me, because he wants to stay alive, which is obviously immediately punished by him smashing into the side of the ship and dying and freezing to death. It all happens so quickly, but there's a lot of like tension, and you can tell, like, for the most part, everyone is kind of on that same pragmatic page. And in a weird way, it shows Cliff Curtis's character a lot too. Searle. Searle's his name. I think in a weird way, this is the best way that he would want to go in the situation because he like wants to see the sun. I think a lot of these set pieces, they do a lot to show these characters making very quick, dynamic decisions, which I appreciated. Definitely, that's the one that stands out to me, and the one in the spacesuits with the first Captain Kaneda and Kappa. I thought that was really well shot. The way they have it, like very claustrophobic, like within the suits, like they're sweating. They have like a water tube in there so they can drink. The suit is like super shiny to get the sunlight off it. It's just very visually striking, and I like that.
I thought you were referring to like the location when you said set pieces. So I talk about the ship in my notes.
Okay.
It's always going to be claustrophobic if a spaceship acts as the main characters, not only just their mode of transportation, but their home. So to me, pretty much the entire movie was claustrophobic. The Film Comics Explain video, again, shout out to them, said either the cinematographer or art director, I can't remember who specifically, they wanted no gold or yellow in the interior of the ship, wishing to keep that color for the sun sequences only, or whenever they're showing the sun. And the silver inside enhanced the cold and unfeeling nature of the interior. Only knock I have against the physical set, I didn't understand where anyone was at points in the movie, and we're never given a point of reference for how far things are away from each other. The only thing I remember getting was when they reach Icarus 1 and say, Icarus is big, we gotta split up. So I didn't know how worried I should be about characters when they're running from one end of the hallway to the other, because I don't know how far anything is. They're like, okay, we're in the pilot room. I don't know what it's called. We gotta get to the oxygen garden. I'm like, okay, you can get there in 3 cuts. You can get there in 1 cut. I don't know how far you gotta go. Like, how tense this moment should be. If it's literally the next door over, like, I don't know. So
yeah, and especially like that scene where Michelle Yeoh is running for the plant room. I wasn't sure how worried to be for her or for the rest of the ship. It's like, oh, the oxygen's gonna blow up. I'm like, okay, well, what does that
but
mean
like,
for the rest
where
of
is
it?
that in relation to everything else? Like, is that close to the crew quarters? Is it not? Like, yeah. She was also uncomfortably close to the glass when there's all that fire
I thought
on
she
the
was
other
gonna
side.
blow up. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
she's dead here. She's the first one gone.
And the like escalation of that scene with like the editing and the music and her performance, it really felt like she was gonna die there. What did you think of the two scenes, if you had anything to add there?
I felt the tension more with the slingshot airlock scene. I think both were good though. The only thing with the sun shield one was I didn't know exactly where they were in relation to anything. Because one, it was dark. I mean, it's set in space, but they are next to the sun. So they put them in spacesuits, put them out in space, but I didn't know where they were in relation to the sun. I didn't know where the panels were. Like, they might have only shown the entire ship once prior to that point. So I didn't know where they were coming from, where they were going, where the panels were, and where the sun was in relation to the shield. I didn't know what the shield looked like, but I still did feel the tension because I was like, okay, I don't have a point of reference where anybody is right now. All I know is they're in trouble of being burned alive right now. That the sun is coming around from one of these angles. That's what I got from it. And then, obviously, it did happen. So I liked the airlock scene a bit more because I was like, either they're just not going to survive this because they're wrapped in what looks like saran wrap and aluminum foil, or one of them, at least one of them, is going to make it. I also liked the decision-making process in that because those decisions made in that short sequence actually set up part of my topic with the themes of humanity, because Mace was given so much to do in this movie, which I'm not faulting them for. Going from being pissed off at Kappa to using the logic and fighting against the emotion, using logic in his brain, like, he's got to wear the suit because we got to make sure this mission is done. And then seeing, well, I'm getting into my topic, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, I only had one more note, and then I'm good to transition into it. Part of, like, what we've been talking about, I don't want to, like, deviate too much from this, but I feel like what makes these scenes work is a lot of what distinguishes the better stunts in the Mission Impossible series for me. And that's true of, like, other things as well, but those are, I feel like, really good examples of when you set up stakes, when you set up mechanics, so we can get at least some kind of picture of what does success look like and where can obstacles come in. Like, when something goes wrong, we understand why it's such a big deal. Across all the stunts in that series, I feel like they always work best when there's at least some kind of planning phase. And we didn't have as much of that in this movie, but like you were just saying about the airlock scene, there's kind of the decision-making stage where they're like, okay, this is at least going to maximize our chances for success, and we don't really need the danger set up because it's space. We know what the danger is. But I think it's really cool when you can make something really simple, like just they're moving 20 feet through space, and it's like the most tense moment in the movie. It's something that could be, under other circumstances, really simple. And that was basically, to sum up my last note, technology and the absence of it, I feel like, is always a good way to create obstacles. There's kind of tropey ways to do that, but sci-fi at its best, I think, takes advantage of that. Maybe not at its best, but it's often a good place to take advantage of that. And making your technology have limits, I think, is almost always a good choice. It just grounds the scene more, and it elevates. I think we kind of talked about this in the Interstellar episode. Like, if you had more, like, fantastical or spectacle heavy, like Star Trek, Star Wars kind of action or elements in that movie, it decreases the tension of some of those other scenes because you're thinking with action movie logic, and that's completely different. Where, like, in an action movie, somebody could do something that's probably impossible and, you know, fall off a building that would probably kill them, but they just go, ugh, and then, like, get up off of the car that they fell on, and we're like, all right, sure.
Bro,
Just puts all their bones back in place.
Yeah. It's just a different type of scene logic. I like it when sci-fi is more in this tone where there's just more tension because you're not allowed to break the rules of science. Even if you're having something like maybe you're stretching one thing and that's just kind of the buy of your movie. People can still look 25 and live forever. Okay, outside of that, everything else has, like, time is not allowed to slow down. It's not allowed to go backwards. You got to, like, stick within that rule. I'm referencing In Time for the uninitiated.
I got it.
I know you guys got it. If you break that rule, like, I think it's just an important thing to work within sci-fi. Like, even within this, can you just make a massive, like, shield mirror and that protects you from the sun? I'm sure somebody could go into the science of it, but, like, for this movie, okay, we buy that. And the sun just incinerates you instantly if you're this close and it shines on you. All right, cool. Like, that's your rule.
If the sun shines on you.
It's a little bit of sus-shine, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I've been waiting all week to say that.
That gives me an idea for a movie.
Sus-shine.
No, not sunshine. You know what? Never mind. No, I'm not telling you.
Serious film. I really am.
I mean, it is, but like, and I think it takes it seriously.
But this is
like,
the levity that it needed. This kind of humor. This is what needed to happen. Captain America makes no quips.
I don't think it would have been helped by that. Like, in all seriousness, I think that would have actually made me dislike the first half of this movie.
It would have been hilarious if he started cursing Cap out and then told himself language.
That would have been really funny. I like that the funniest part of the movie for me is in that beginning half, right
The
after
apology?
they're fighting. Yeah, the apology scene where he comes up, he's like, "I'm the one apologizing."
Yeah, he
Silence.
was like that.
Is that the apology? Yep. Like, to me, that's perfect character dynamic humor, because they're not making a joke, they're just letting the situation be funny. Because the fact is, like, Mace knows he's being an idiot, and that technically he has to admit it, but he can't. Like, not out loud.
That was my favorite moment of the movie because I was expecting a little more of that at least, but that was, I think, the last we got of it.
Yeah, that was really, like, the main instance of it. And I think that would have been fun to, like, see more of that, but we got other stuff.
It would have made it feel more tragic, though, if we got more of that.
Yeah, I feel like it's a strength and weakness of Alex Garland. Like, as you guys have been talking about it, I've been thinking back. I think there's only one time that I can remember, like, laughing during an Alex Garland movie, and it was not intentional. Like, it wasn't something that was supposed to be funny. I won't bother explaining just because there's a lot of context for it, and it's kind of a spoiler for Annihilation. I feel like some of his characters just feel, and there's a couple of them in this movie, they just feel so morbid, and, like, he's so into, like, these heady, like, deep, depressing themes that nobody ever, like, cracks a smile. He never, like, lightens the mood. I feel like Ex Machina strikes a little bit of a better balance with that, where, okay, actually, scratch that, because one scene that is very entertaining and, like, genuinely fun from one of his movies is Oscar Isaac dancing in Ex Machina. Somehow that works. Great. I'm glad it's there. That scene doesn't really need to be in the movie, but, like, Oscar Isaac's character in that is, he feels like a real dude. Like, he has a very vibrant personality. Domhnall Gleeson has, like, enough of a personality there, too. In a way that I think he sometimes falls into this, like, characters are just very sad and stoic all the time. And they never crack a smile once. I don't always hate that. Like, I think it kind of works here. I wouldn't want him to try to lighten the mood, because I feel like he's not good at it. And he just doesn't want to.
Yeah,
I'd be open to
fair.
Hearing that refuted, but just, like, play to your strengths, but at the same time, like, he can get a little bit one note with just everyone sad all the time.
I think it's why it works for the first half, like you were saying, because you said you liked the first half better, and like I was saying before, like, especially the beginning, it's very plot focused. So, like, in a way, that sort of, like, stoic mentality works in the fact that, like, they're all scientists. Like, they're together there, but they're all co-workers that are very much forced to be close with each other because they don't really have a choice. Like, we don't get,
It's a
like,
work retreat.
friendship dynamics between them necessarily, except for, like, maybe a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Alien, where the first scene we see the whole crew together, it establishes that they're all friends and they're all joking around. Like, it's not that kind of environment. So like
I feel
it
like they
makes
tried with
sense
the cooking scene though, like the
a
dinner scene they
little
had.
bit.
It's definitely giving alien crew vibes. Like that was one of my first notes that I wrote down was like, oh, big alien vibes from like just seeing this crew all around together. We know not all of them's going to make it out. That maybe can transition us into Jelani's topic.
So my topic is predictable deaths and the theme of humanity. When I say predictable deaths, I don't mean like in a Final Destination way. Even though, again, the way Chris Evans, I don't need to see him die, bro. That's cat. But I mean predictable deaths in the way like when you know the crew isn't making it out. And for my topic, I'm going to be asking a lot of questions. At what point in the movie could you guys tell they weren't going back to Earth?
The beginning, probably. I've seen it before, obviously, but like it's almost like Earth is an abstract idea, as opposed to actually being somewhere that we're gonna see. Like I do like the scene where Chris Evans is in the hologram room and he's like watching the waves and stuff like that, but it creates this sort of ethereal feel to the Earth that almost feels like it's like a place they can't go back to, almost like they're kind of already dead, if that makes sense. The vibe that I was getting from the movie was kind of that like they were not going back to Earth. Like whatever happens, even if they succeed, they're not making it home.
It is a little off-putting. It's not shown in the beginning like Interstellar. Like there's no setup. We just start off in space. So that's a good point.
Yeah, we don't even really know what the Earth itself. We know that the sun is
What it
dying,
looks
but
like.
we're so
Yeah.
close. We can't tell brightness wise that it's like fizzling out or whatever. We can't tell what conditions are like back on Earth. It's all stuff that we hear.
Evan.
I guess I wasn't clocking it exactly, but I wouldn't say right from the start. I like that the characters know that they might not make it out of this mission. I think it's good for giving us access to them where like there's at least hope. Like it's not a being sent to their doom for like being sacrificed for humanity. But at the same time, like they all know that they could. I want to say there was a point like I guess probably Act 3, maybe once it turned into the slasher movie. I think around there is when I was like, oh, yeah, they're not making it back. Like, once enough of the crew was killed off, and it was like, it's pretty much just Cillian Murphy, and Rose Byrne. At that point, I was pretty certain they weren't getting out of there. That said, I don't think the fact that, like, I knew people were gonna die made me less compelled. I'll talk about how I don't like that it turns into a slasher, but I don't think the predictability of the deaths in itself, like I said with my topic, you could kind of guess that like somebody's not making it out of this sequence, but I kind of think that's good in a way. Like the fact that you think that they might not make it out makes it more tense for me.
Mm-hmm. For me is when they get to Icarus 1. Seeing that they couldn't salvage anything for the ship they went off course for, I knew they were cooked. And then, not too long after, they have the meeting where they say they have to kill Trey to have enough oxygen to make it there. It's at that point they're pretty much telling the audience the crew's not making it back to Earth, so prepare for their deaths. How do you feel when a movie is telling you these characters are going to die? Do you just accept it? Does it anger you? I feel like you kind of answered the question, Evan, already, but...
Yeah, I mean, at least for this movie. Broadly, I'd have to think about that.
I don't know if it angers me exactly. I think it depends on the way that it's done and like in the context of it. If it's a case where the tension comes from, are these characters going to survive? Obviously, you don't want to know that they're all going to die. But I think in a way, like, you can mine tension from other sources if you kind of have the feeling that, like, this is their last mission. In a way, it helped me step back from it and think about, like, okay, well, they know they're not making it back, so I can just watch them sort of be characters in this situation. Because that's an interesting situation, right? When you kind of, like, know that you're going to die, but you're like, well, I'm here. I'm just going to do the mission that I came to do. Kind of see how that plays out. So I think it adds a certain degree of tension, especially when, too, like, you get certain characters that maybe don't feel that way. I was waiting for them to kind of turn on each other and lose it, and I didn't really get that basically until like the comms officer did, right? When he's like, take off the suit, I'm getting back on the ship, or whatever. Like, that was the first time that I felt like, okay, this seems like a genuine human reaction to what's going on. And I mean, I've never been in a situation like that before, where I was genuinely under the impression like the only thing that matters is the mission because I'm not making it back anyway. It keeps me from thinking like, well, who's gonna die next and when and why. And so when the deaths actually hit, I think it helps to sort of ground me in those moments.
Evan, you didn't have anything to add, did you?
I do, not so much going off of that, but I've been thinking of like other examples of character deaths in other movies because I feel like most of the time it doesn't typically hit that hard for me. Certainly in this movie, like I didn't care that much about any of the deaths. I feel like if I can make like a broad generalization or like find a pattern for when I like it, it's usually when a character's death is the end of their arc. The first thing that jumped to mind when you ask like, you know, when you know a character's gonna die, American Beauty opens with a voiceover telling us that Lester is I think he says like in less than a year I'm going to die. So we know that's going to happen by the end of the movie. I never feel like that's affected my reading of it. I also personally don't feel like his death, like the fact that he does die at the end, I've never felt like it really adds to that movie, and there's behind the scenes stuff about why it's there. But there were two deaths that I thought of that I really like. One of them I can't really talk about because it's a spoiler for something that I really want to cover on the show. But I guess to be very, very vague in general about it, because I can't even name this movie or it'll kind of ruin it. It's a case where a character has been like anticipating death for most of the movie and like, I guess, trying to avoid it. And the ending is them accepting it in a way that I think is very resonant. And I guess on paper, something like my other death is pretty similar to that, which is Jack Sparrow at the end of Dead Man's Chest. I feel like is a really good end to his arc in that movie. Granted, it's not a permanent one because he comes back and we like know by the very last scene of that movie that he's probably not fully dead. I still think it caps off his arc for that movie really well. I guess that's not entirely answering your question, but like I find that just like when a character dies, a lot of times it doesn't, like sometimes if I really like them it can just be upsetting, but most of the time I don't find it super compelling. I feel like it's more often than not it's a cop out for like actually bringing them to a satisfying conclusion. I think there's arguments to be made against that, but that's my sort of broad take.
I have a question based on that. If you guys watch a movie and you don't know a character is going to die, then you rewatch it, does it affect your viewing of the movie afterwards? Because I've found that it doesn't necessarily, even if it's really foreshadowed, but I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I think it's a case-by-case thing. There's another example that I don't want to talk about because you guys haven't. I know neither of you have seen this movie. I guess it just often like...
Tenet?
No, it's not Tenet.
You know, I've seen Tenet.
Oh.
Yeah, you've seen Tenet.
Once.
There's not really deaths in that are super impactful. It depends on the case. Like the first thing that jumped to mind, I'm sorry to bring this up, was Gwen Stacy in Amazing Spider-Man 2. I just still don't want her to die at the end when I'm watching. I'm just like, oh, this time, please catch her. But then I know it's not. Like
the scene is done so well that it's so tense throughout, and you're holding on to that one little bit of hope that it's not gonna, and then it does.
I don't want to rewatch that movie because of that scene.
It's still, like, despite the other bumps, that scene is still heartbreaking. And for another, like, this hasn't come out yet, but another Spider-Man example, like, please do not kill Miles' dad in Beyond the Spider-Verse. If they do, like, I think it can still work. I really don't want it to happen.
I'll be sad.
I don't want any of them to die. They're talking about killing Gwen Stacy too. I'm like, why would they do that with an alternate version? All right.
I will be so unwell if they kill his dad in the next movie. Because, like, they already did it in the video game, and that was pretty rough, too. Like, and same with spoilers for the Insomniac game. They kill him and Aunt May in that game. Those are some rough deaths.
In the same game. That's nuts.
Same game, yeah. It typically doesn't make me avoid of rewatching it.
No, not like avoid, just like kind of like, does it make you feel different, going into it the second time, knowing that it's kind of leading up to their death?
I think it's a case by case thing because, like you said, sometimes it's foreshadowed. Sometimes, like, you can maybe see where that's a good arc for them or not. At face value, it doesn't change it the same way every time. So it's really a case by case thing.
Yeah, it depends on who it is. If I'm deeply connected to the character or whoever's playing the character, like, I'm likely to just not. No, it's case by case because I'll still rewatch some Marvel movie. I just saw the ending to Endgame again.
There's a lot of stuff that has. I mean, I feel like it's not a spoiler to say, like, people still love Titanic, and DiCaprio dies at the end of that. Like, it hasn't stopped people from loving that movie throughout the past 2.5 decades.
That's true. It's just really long.
I still haven't seen it.
I think I have that on the list. It's not my favorite, but I think it'd be interesting to talk about.
It would be. It would definitely be interesting to talk about. It's a very packed movie, but I feel like it doesn't feel like it's over 3 hours.
I'm going to disagree. It absolutely feels like it's over 3 hours.
I haven't seen it in a long time, so it might feel differently now. Like, to me, like Dark Knight Rises, a movie that I do unironically like for the most part, doesn't feel like it's almost 3 hours, but it is.
Probably depends if you break it up over a few nights as well. Jelani, did you have... Where else did you want to go with your topic? Because you had other questions.
Yeah, I was going to answer my own question, too. If the movie is telling me the character isn't going to die, I'm okay if it's done right. It is a space movie, so space mistake is bound to happen. I feel like it was close to being something a bit more hopeful. I think I said that before. I read a comment. It might have been under the YouTube video I watched. It was on the verge of being a masterpiece, which I do feel is the case. Like, I feel like it was saying some good things about humanity and whatnot. Even though it didn't make back its $40 million budget. Like, I'm not quite sure why it felt like it was close to something really good. Ignoring the third act. Like, I felt like something was missing from it. But that also brings up my other part of the topic, the theme of humanity. It's not a fun situation to imagine yourself in, but if you put yourself in the crew's shoes, what would you have done in any of their situations? Kind of a rhetoric question. Feel free to answer if anything comes to mind. The only one I feel is evil on the crew is the literal devil allegory, as everyone made decisions based off of who their characters were set up to be. I also feel each crew member represented one, if not a few, themes that connected to humanity. Some of these themes stronger than others, but Kaneda was duty, Searle, curiosity, Harvey, cowardice, Trey, guilt. Was it
Corazon?
Corazon. Kind of difficult for me to give her anything, because if I didn't feel like she was given a lot to do, so I'll say, like, either parental bond, like over the plants she had, or life. I don't know. Mace was also difficult, as he was the complete opposite of Corazon, as he was given a lot to do. So grit, determination, anger, but also duty, like Kaneda.
Mace is Chris Evans, right? Sorry, I don't remember any.
Yeah. Mace is Chris Evans.
And Corazon is Michelle Yeoh, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
Cassie, heart. Kappa, survival instinct. And Pinbacker for fun, religion. I liked the scenes they chose to reveal each of these, because I don't know if this is what the director and writer were going for, as far as the pinning a theme of humanity to each character. But I liked the scenes they had for these characters to show the quality of the theme. So with Kaneda, his duty was to fix the panel, stop the ship from burning up. He dies in that. Searle's curiosity gets him killed. Well, yeah, because he could have just stayed alive on Icarus for a little while until he ran out of stuff to eat or oxygen or whatever. Harvey's cowardice, Angel, you were saying, was punished immediately right after when they shut out the lock. Trey's guilt also gets him killed. Oh my god, all of these themes are connecting to their deaths. I'm just not realizing that. Oops. What's the pronunciation? Because I keep wanting to say corazon, like
Yeah, I mean that's
heart
the
in
way it would be,
Spanish.
but they don't do the inflection as much when they actually say it. I was wondering honestly as I'm watching it if like that was a nickname or if that was like her actual name because they never really
Yeah,
make
because that's
that
a very like
clear. It's hard because like Kaneda's definitely a last name, right? But Cassie is a first name, so I can't tell who has what. It's very confusing.
Trey, I don't. Harvey,
Trey could be either.
Dr. Searle. I would assume Searle is his last name. Kappa
Yeah,
is his
Harvey
last
could
name
be
because he's.
either.
Yeah, Robert
Yeah.
Kappa, James Mace, Cassie, I don't know.
I mean, if Star Wars has taught us anything, Mace could also be a first name. I don't know.
I mean, short for Mason could be. I kind of want to rewatch this with that reading of all the characters because I didn't see that at all. But it's it's certainly a lot more interesting than I was reading this movie as. So that would be a major reason I'd want to revisit.
I came up with that as I was coming up with the topic. I was like, wait, each of these, it feels like they're representing something. Because
No,
in
it's
their
a cool
decision
reading.
making, yeah.
I wish I
in their
remembered
dec-
them well enough to like see you on it. I wasn't looking at it that way at all.
I feel like the one that sticks in my mind most as far as that goes is like Searle, because there's a lot of religious aspects to this movie too. Searle's definitely like worship in a lot of ways, like curiosity, but also like heavy on the worship, and they're not subtle with that at all, really. And then Corazon's like maternal, nurturing nature
I
of
wanted to
everything.
say that, but I didn't want to say that because I was trying to. If it was a male character, wouldn't have said paternal either. Like I was trying to. I didn't know the proper term for that.
I feel like nurturing is a
Nurturing,
good one because that's essentially what she's
nurturing.
doing. Like she makes it very clear, like that the plants are her babies, and like she cries when they die. She finds one, she's super happy.
I
Like
mean, that's
Dies
also a
with it in her
source of
hands.
life for them. It's not just a sentimental thing. There's a very practical like application to the
oh,
plants
sure,
being
but I think
alive.
from the aspect of her character, the way that they write it and the way that she plays it, it definitely comes off that way. At least for her specifically.
She doesn't feel guilty about the garden burning up or anything like that. So I'm with Angel. I feel like it's more like a parent thing, like they're her babies.
Yeah.
Plus, she's a botanist. I feel like a lot of actually, I don't know any botanists, but this might be in character for botanists. If you're a botanist, let me know.
Botanists rise up. Um, I have a question to throw in here. How do you feel like the initial decision about going to find the Icarus One fits into this theme? Because I feel like that might come into play there a bit, where their initial decision, which I thought was one of the most compelling parts of the movie, was like, do we go with this mission straight away, or do we put ourselves at a bit more risk and deviate towards them? I feel like you could kind of read a thematic question into that. Like, do we look out for the possibility that these other people are alive at the risk of maybe the mission and definitely at risk of our own lives and the possibility
I
of making it back?
I think that still falls within Kappa's survival instinct theme because, yes, initially, well, I think it might have been Cassie. I don't remember. Initially, it's about possibly saving crew members' lives. Because they're like, there's a distress signal. We can go off course and save whoever's there. You know, what if it were you guys? Whatever. But Kappa's ultimate decision is two bombs, two chances to save humanity are better than one. So I think that still falls within survival instinct because he's there to save the planet.
Yeah. I got the impression that from that scene, like, Mace was very adamant on, like, we're not going out of our way because nothing's more important than the mission, which is, like, that's his primary motivation throughout the whole thing. It almost felt like Searle was trying to come up with a reason why they should do the kind of humane thing and, go and see if there are any survivors. Like, yes, there's a very practical reasoning for it.
He could also be curious as to what's on the ship.
Exactly. All that dust and human skin, and then the sun. But I think that's kind of what they were going for, was like that this is a good reason to go do this, but it's also the humane thing to do, knowing full well that, like, Mace wouldn't do that. And that very well, like, there's a lot of crew members that may just not do that, which is part of why I think he said, like, we shouldn't put it to a vote. It should be the expert to do it. And then Kaneda, points out Kappa.
Mace could also be stubbornness too,
Yeah,
because his mind isn't changed once it's made up. Because like once like four people die, he's like, this is all based on your decision, and he like, all right, this part was kind of not a little too on the nose, but he rubs the blood, Trey's blood in his hands, like that's on you. That's where that goes, or whatever he says. I'm like, all right,
yeah.
dude.
He had a couple moments like that.
But his mind has never changed.
Maybe they work because it's Chris Evans. He plays it really well.
Yeah, his mind is never changed. Could also be passion. I don't know. That's why I said a lot of things work for Mace, but not so much for others.
I kind of like this reading though, because if you just like gave me an assignment, essentially, to like take this movie, this premise, and say like explore the theme of humanity in this, like if I have to do it like that, I think my first instinct would be, is humanity about ensuring your own survival or ensuring others' survival? I feel like that's the very simple way to do it. And in a way, you could read that into this movie, but I feel like they're never really that concerned about their own survival. So, like, when Kappa initiates, like, the bomb sequence at the end and blows up the sun and ends up dying in the process, like, that's not really a decision he was like struggling that hard with. I think your reading here, and like I guess it's a little hard to say if this is how they were intentionally approaching it, but that's a much more nuanced take on like what does it mean to be human. I feel like the one I was pitching there is a lot more simplified, and that's kind of why I want to go back and look at this again, because that's a way more interesting thematic reading than anything that was coming to mind. I feel like a topic that I hear about a lot in writing, and I've even made a video about it, is make your minor characters, or just your character web in general, about theme. I did it with Curse of the Black Pearl. Like, all of the characters in that movie represent a different take on the theme. And the way you're presenting it here is like there's a big loudish quality about each of these crew members that are like, I guess, different humanish, I don't know what the right word is there, human elements that they're expressing, which is interesting.
But yeah, that was it. That was it for me. If y'all had any more.
No, now I do want to rewatch this.
For that reading, right? It's a good reading. Like, I don't know that I would totally know like what each character necessarily represents. Like, there's a few that are obvious. Like, I would say like Trey is absolutely guilt. There's definitely like no doubt there. Kappa, I don't know, because there were points where I had a hard time reading Kappa, but like Searle's definitely worship and curiosity element. Weirdly, Harvey, I didn't get the cowardice thing until like he actually outwardly is a coward, until he like outwardly says take off the suit. Like, I never got the impression that he was going to panic like that before that.
That's because he wasn't given anything. That's the only thing I remember him for.
Yeah, he wasn't really given as much to do, I think, to like set that up. And I think that's some of where this does not fall flat entirely, but like there are elements that like were not necessarily set up, which I want to talk about when we get into my topic as far as like setup goes, because sometimes they go into the vibes or into the plot and they don't set up like the character decisions as well as they could, and that comes with an ensemble cast also. There's a lot of characters to this movie.
I think we're at your topic. If you guys didn't have any more for me,
I'm good to move on.
That was the end of mine.
My topic was what I think a lot of people know about this movie before they've actually seen it. The third act tonal shift. What happens is at some point in this movie, and it was way more jarring this time when I watched it than I remember it being the first time, was a massive tonal whiplash where all of a sudden it kind of turns into a space slasher like Pandorum, or like, sort of Event Horizon, elements of that, where the captain of the Icarus One, who we had seen in video files, kind of like slowly losing his mind over the course of the movie a couple of times. All of a sudden he is on the ship and heavily, heavily burned from the sun. And it looks like he killed his entire crew basically. and he thinks he was told by God to deliver humanity to the sun, essentially, like deliver them to the afterlife by letting the earth burn or freeze. I'm not 100% sure what the sun was gonna do. I don't remember if it was gonna explode or if it was gonna just fizzle out. I don't remember. But
It's
essentially that
supposed to turn
was
into a black hole, isn't it? Technically, in real life.
yeah.
The way I've always been taught is that after a certain amount of time, a star, like as it's reaching the end of its life, it expands. And then I
Hmm.
think later it contracts. I think it becomes like a red giant after, or that's what I think is supposed to happen to our sun. Some crazy million amount of years in the future, it's gonna like expand to be a red giant, and then once it like burns itself out there, it condenses and becomes like a dwarf star, which I've never
No,
quite
it becomes
understood.
a black hole is a collapsed star.
Yeah, I
Doesn't it
think that's the
become
end
a
result though.
dwarf before though? There's such a thing as a dwarf star, right? And I feel like that's like right at the end of its life, maybe just before it's a black hole.
Yeah, I
I don't know.
think
It's been a
it's
while since I took
before
those
it's right before the
classes.
collapse. I don't know. I mean, well, the thing is too, this movie is not super scientifically accurate, and I don't think like the actual way that the star is going to kill the Earth is necessarily important. The imagery that they're using, they don't show him super clearly, but I get the impression that like his character, his entire body is burnt. Like you
No,
can
you're
tell
right,
just
Evan.
from the little glimpses we get of him. In this situation, metaphorically, he was consumed by God, which is the sun, or he like exposed himself to that true form or whatever. And that's essentially what, in this context, humanity he was told to do to humanity. Essentially, like the sun's gonna die and it's gonna overtake the earth. Like that's the impression I got. There's not a lot of build up to it. It just kind of happens where all of a sudden he's on the ship and it turns into a completely different movie.
I think it kind of starts it when it they start showing cutting like flashing the pictures of the old crew. It was like that's really
Yeah,
creepy.
Hmm.
when they're on the Icarus one. I noticed that this
Interesting.
time, actually, my second viewing, I made a note on that too. That was actually really, really cool. I liked that they added that little thing in, because if you look away for even a second, it's not necessarily something you'd notice.
That was hella creepy.
It was super creepy, very nice, haunting touch, and like the Icarus one already feels like so much more empty and cold than even the main Icarus ship, because there's no lights, there's no sound or movement, like there's just dust and skin in there essentially, and it's really, really eerie. It almost makes me wish that they'd spent a little more time exploring that to kind of show how it was juxtaposed with the ship that's like currently running.
Mace makes a joke about aliens being on the thing, and I was like, Is this movie gonna do that?
I was
Because that
wondering that
hasn't been
too. I was
established.
like, because I figured we were probably getting pretty close, and it's doing a little more like horror filmmaking language. I was like, is it just gonna be aliens, or is like actually? I think what I was expecting, I didn't write this down, was like there's some weird presence on the ship, and the sun makes them all go crazy. Like and then it
Mm.
just descends into madness for the last act. It was kind of what I was gearing up for. I think this is slightly better. Still don't like it.
Yeah, well, there's actually another theory too. There is a theory that and I'll get into this in a bit, but basically that like there is no pinbacker. I don't know if you guys have heard this theory, that it's essentially like Killian Murphy goes crazy. Based on my watch through, like my second one, knowing about that and like looking for it, there's a couple of things that make that not make sense to me and not necessarily work, but I think that would also be fine. It also feels weird that they wouldn't maybe make that more obvious. That
That's
does
not
feel
very
like a little.
survival instinct of him. That doesn't follow the theme, so I don't like it.
That's fair.
I'm not really a fan of that reading either, personally, but I'm not really a fan of where they take it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing, is like the ending feels like a totally different thing. And I think that's what some people go into this, at least that's what I went into this thinking when I first saw it, was that it was something closer to like a Dead Space or a Pandorum, where it's like a scary, like survival horror, like slasher movie. And then you watch it, and the beginning's really not like that at all. Even if it's like a psychological thriller, there's not a lot of that thriller vibe early on. Most of the tension comes from the mission and the crew decisions and things like that. And a lot of the tension is honestly just between like Mace and Kappa. They're sort of like fighting with each other. And also like certain things like, Trey making a space mistake very early on, that having a huge effect on the mission later on. Like, everything builds into each other. And that also works, but then for it to suddenly turn into this one guy is just gonna finish off everybody that's left, it almost feels like they didn't know where to take it
It definitely feels like a cop out.
necessarily. And I've heard this is an issue in a lot of Danny Boyle movies where like the last act is the part that nobody really likes because they go in like a very
Danny
weird
Boyle
or
or
different
Alex
direction.
Garland? I'm a lot less
Danny
familiar with
Boyle.
Danny. Okay, I'm much
Danny
less
Boyle,
familiar
he's
with
the
his
director. He did
filmography.
this, he did 28 Days Later. I think he works with Alex Garland a lot though.
Well, apparently, I was reading up. They apparently split because of some like disagreements that happened with this movie, and now this year they're finally reuniting for 28 years later. I think
Okay.
they'd done before this. They did 28 Days Later, and then The Beach, which I haven't seen, is apparently another collaboration between them.
Yeah, I think
Um,
I heard about that one. I was hearing today though. I think that's another one that is one where like the third act goes in a totally different direction, and it loses a lot of people there too. So it makes me wonder because like Alex Garland movies aren't all like this either. So I'm wondering if it's maybe like sort of the way they combine together. Not that it's necessarily bad. They're trying tonal shifts that don't necessarily work. Like I watched Event Horizon last year, and it is kind of crazy throughout the whole thing, but it keeps that same kind of nuts tone throughout. So I think that's why it mostly works. Whereas this one, it felt very contemplative and bittersweet early on, with like little hints at the sort of existential type horror, especially when you get that opening scene with Searle looking into the sun and him talking about it kind of like consuming you or like filling you up as opposed to darkness where it's like the absence of
yeah,
something. Like you get little elements of like how terrifying but also how like exhilarating that can be, which is sort of what I thought was going on. But then by the end, it's just terrifying because you literally have a burnt monster running around the ship stabbing people.
yeah. It is at least set up a bit with that. Like when Mark Strong comes in and starts spouting sun philosophy or whatever he's talking about. Like it isn't the first time we've heard that, so it's like you're saying, it doesn't completely come out of nowhere. But the thing that really breaks it for me is that it basically invalidates the rest of the movie in front of it. It just kind of makes that stop mattering.
How so?
Well, because it's not really continuing, like all the stuff you were talking about in your topic with like the all these characters are expressing different like aspects of humanity. I think maybe a big reason I didn't see any of that is because it doesn't matter after Mark Strong sunburnt monster shows up and starts killing everyone. It's not really dealing with the dramatic questions that were there before. I won't go too into detail with this, but there was a script that I read for a coverage job that did kind of a similar thing where it's a pretty good crime story for the first like hour. And then act 3, something there's a bit of a twist and one character randomly goes crazy and it turns into like this contained horror movie that has nothing to do with the front half. And it was too bad because the first part was actually legit good, and I didn't read a lot of legit good scripts in that job.
That's how I feel about Trap. Anyway,
I think a good example, the only good example that's coming to mind for something like this is Psycho, where you start off, you get like fully invested, and we talked about that when we covered that movie. Like you get fully invested in Marion Crane for the first hour,
solid.
and
Yeah.
then like it's not invalidated. That first half doesn't stop being relevant. We're still like tying characters back from the beginning, but it is pulling the rug out from under us. I
Hmm.
don't feel like it's cheating itself in that same way. Whereas this, it's just kind of like, surprise, it's a slasher now. Like, have fun watching a slasher movie. And some of it's just that I don't particularly like slashers. Like, the first half of this movie is great. It's a 4-star half of a movie. When I said this reminded me of Prometheus, like, some of it is just that Mark Strong kind of, I feel like, gives the same vibes. I think the engineer at the end of Prometheus also, like, holds someone up by their neck the way he does. on like a big stone platform in a weird spaceship. It just reminded me of Prometheus in that, like, oh, it's going off the rails, and like, this is another thing that Alex Garland does, I feel like, an annoying amount of times, is a character just starts spouting insane dogma at us, and that's like so crazy and like philosophical. I'm just like, okay, bud, have fun with that. And I just kind of check out. He does it in, I think 28 Days Later kind of does it, maybe not quite as egregiously as this. Annihilation sort of does it too, and it's not as prominent there. I really check out when that happens, like introducing an insane character that goes around killing people is just not interesting to me.
Did he kill Cassie? How does Cassie die? Does she die with the bomb, or does Pepperoni Man kill her?
I think she dies from the bomb. She might get stabbed by Pinbacker, but I think her and...
Because the camera was shaky. I don't know what was happening.
And they kept doing the freeze frames.
I don't think she was dead when he set off the bomb.
Well, and that's kind of another problem, I think, is like, their survival is not part of the dramatic question. By that point, you raised the question earlier, Jelani, like, when did we know the characters were all going to die? All three of our answers are well before this point. We already know that, and they know that they can't survive the mission. So I guess Mark Strong is trying to sabotage it, but like, if his logic for that is stupid, then like, if he's just on some like Thanos type bullshit, like trying to...
He was sent by the producers. They ran out of money, and he had to kill off the rest of the characters.
I mean, maybe, like, and that's part of it too.
Though, like, that's almost what it feels like. Is like they're picking off everybody else because they've established, like, well, everybody has to die for any of this to work, and we're running out of time.
Already two options come to mind. They could have all died with the bomb. Perfectly fine. That would have been a great ending if they all like sat in a huddle together as in
the viewing room, right?
Or in the viewing room, or if they went in the bomb like Cassie and Kappa end up doing, and they like sit in a huddle together and stare at the sun like a broken family or whatever. That would have been great.
Like Rogue One.
I was thinking more like Don't Look Up or Knowing, which are not fantastic movies either. But yeah, I agree. That could be a good ending.
Or have the equipment proves to be a threat to them because it just killed Chris Evans with him freezing to death. Like, if you want only Kappa to be the one that sees the sun blow up, then it's space. Mistakes can happen. Like, you could just have the technology kill him.
But Cassie also sees it because she's not dead. I don't think she's dead.
But they don't show her, so she doesn't count.
Right.
Okay.
Like, it doesn't even really matter at that point, because if Mark Strong kills her, okay, he robbed her of 10 minutes.
If he didn't, that's why I asked, did he kill her? It doesn't matter.
I think your ending there that you pitched is much more interesting, and that could give us a more interesting third act where, like we've been saying, space mistakes happen. You don't need to throw in some crazy slasher. It doesn't need to become Alien for it to be interesting. You had enough.
It also could have been about, in the theme of humanity, them accepting death. They had a small segment with Cassie talking to Cap about it, like, we're gonna die. But, like, it could have... That entire third act could have been them talking about what they think is on the other side, what it's going to feel like. That could go so many different ways without including a third act villain. Yeah. There didn't need to be a villain.
Even, this is a really, 2000s cheesy way to do it. You kind of have a little bit of a romantic subplot built up with them. I wouldn't be too mad if they kissed as the sun blows up. It's better than this ending.
That'd be cool.
It's a little bit. I don't know. I like that they held back from that, though.
I don't mind it, but I agree. Give us something. That's a much more poignant ending. That it's even kind of beautifully shot the way that Cillian Murphy dies. And like you said, Jelani, even him going into that alone could be more resonant. And in isolation, it works okay. But I do like the ending better of show us what the crew is doing. Whoever's left, show us how they're spending their last moments if they get to choose. That's kind of a beautiful way to end this movie. Instead, you have Mark Strong what you call him, Pepperoni Man, stabbing all of them for 20 minutes, and then it ends that way anyway. Like, I just don't get why. Why was this the compelling thing for them? We've seen slasher movies. We've all seen Alien. Like, it's ripping off Alien, and it's not even a good slasher. For the time that it's a slasher movie, it's not even a good slasher movie. And we don't
Because the
see
slasher
the
movie
effects.
part's only 15 minutes long too. That's the whole thing. Like nothing before that really set it up to be that. If anything, I feel like weirdly the theory about Kappa going crazy over time technically would fit better.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, like it
I don't
technically
love that
would
either,
fit
though.
better to a certain, which is why I get why some people hold on to that theory. I just think that in this particular case, it does not seem to work. Just based on certain ways that it's shot and like the conversations that are happening, and like it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. But even if it did, like I also don't think there was a lot of build up to him going crazy either. Like I said, I watched this like basically twice in a row, like over a couple of days, and I didn't get any impression that he was being driven to that boiling point. If anything, I could see a case for that maybe with Harvey, even like Searle or Mace, but I didn't get that from Kappa. I don't know.
I thought Searle was gonna kill him because I was like, he's way too fascinated with the sun right now.
Oh yeah, he loves the
Ask
sun.
him.
Yeah, I thought he was gonna be the one to like turn crazy when they got there and be like, "Ah, the sun! It's so cool, guys! Listen to my sun religion. All hail
That's
Ra!"
the exact line. It's so cool, guys.
And he says it just like that.
Let's all go into
It's
the
so
sun
cool,
together.
guys.
I think they should have swapped Mace's and Kappa's names because Chris Evans is Cap.
He also looks like he would be in a frat that had Kappa in its name more than
Yeah,
That's true.
Cillian Murphy does.
Well, prior to his haircut.
I mean, both ends of the haircut. It was so jarring seeing him with that, like, 2000s hair, though. I was like, whoa.
I think you're
I don't
each
know if I
talking
like
about
this
two
side
different
of Chris
people.
Evans.
I think Jelani, you're talking about Chris Evans, and Evan, you're talking about Cillian Murphy.
I'm talking about Chris Evans
No,
with
he's
the
talking about Chris
2000s hair.
Oh, you are talking about Chris Evans. Okay, yeah, no, for sure.
Cillian Murphy works
sure.
a lot better with that emo cut than Chris Evans does.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I don't like his haircut in Peaky Blinders. I haven't watched the show, but I see that one shot with the gun to his head, and I was like, what is that haircut?
Yeah, it's
That's
not
like
great.
all their haircut.
This one, he looks like he should be doing a cover of, like, an MCR song or something.
Yeah, that band.
He looks like he belongs in an Evanescence video.
Yeah, it could be that. Mm-hmm.
Yep, that
Really any, like, 2000s band. Like, put him in Creed, put him in Default.
Hoobastank.
Hoobastank, yeah.
Oh
Or,
yeah, that one.
Jelani, you do know some of these bands. Come on.
Nope.
Actually, no, he does kind of look like... He looks like 2000s Rob Thomas, except his hair's black.
Oh,
Oh.
Rob Thomas, yeah.
Yeah.
I still can't tell if you're kidding. I've played you Matchbox 20, dude. You can't play that dumb on Rob Thomas. I have deliberately played you Matchbox 20 songs multiple
What
times.
about Hot Wheels 19? What about their songs?
Okay.
Back to the film.
Anyway,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's most of my notes for the topic, so if you had more.
I don't think the third act shift helps the movie. I was confused by it. I also didn't know why they just couldn't kill him, or why he had the strength of an actual slasher. He lifted Kappa up by his throat with one hand. I was like, okay, we're just
It's the power of belief.
completely out of the realm of reality. Sure, yeah.
If you just let Sun Jesus into your body.
That you become, yeah.
I also didn't care for the way it was shot, the shakiness only on him. I was just like, can you just hold the camera still so I can see what the makeup effect looks like? The close-up shots of the haziness, none of it. The religious stuff was okay, but it felt forced. His audio logs, like him progressively going crazy. I was like, okay, there was a bit of teasing, hinting towards him going nuts. But also, all of the crew of Icarus 1 agreed on a death pact, while Pinbacker was the only one that remained. Like, why was he the only one that survived? It didn't look like he killed the other crew members, because they say, once you enter that room, and I'm of the belief of what they say here, it looked like they all just sat together and revealed themselves to the sun and got cooked. I guess it's because he felt the need. He needed to be the deliverer or whatever.
Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe they were all in the room together and he just left at the last second. Like he felt the burning and he didn't stay like the rest of them did. But
He
he
was like, "Oh,
got
that's hot."
mostly fried, right? Or he could have like tried to stop them, if anything, and then got severely burned trying to stop them. They all died and then he went nuts.
It would have been more interesting if he had like chickened out of the like suicide pact with them, and that was his character. He was like, "I'm the only one left. What do I do?" That's a much more interesting character. Still don't think it would have.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's the worst direction to take this in. I don't especially care why he's the one who survived, but that's a much more grounded motivation that I could just understand it more.
So yeah, the slasher flick is not for the better. Also, this plot hole was too big to ignore. He sneaks onto the ship without anybody noticing, and then forcefully detaches the docking bay, the airlock, whatever.
That's another thing with the insanity theories. How the hell did he get on the ship in the first place?
I think what happened was they were looking across the street and a bus came by, and then when it left, he wasn't there, and that's how he got on the ship. Do you have a better explanation, though?
No, there is no better explanation. And I guess they're like, oh, it's like a creepy ethereal space movie. Maybe that's... No, it's still dumb. It still doesn't make sense. There were cameras in the airlock, too. That's the whole thing. And we know there are cameras in the airlock.
Because they show
Cillian
them from
Murphy
that.
talks to Mace through the cameras in
The
the airlock.
sun can
That
lead to
and-
some abilities that some believe to be
Why?
unnatural.
Why wouldn't? Why wouldn't Icarus tell them? She was able to tell there were 5 crew members. Why wouldn't she say unknown crew member has entered the... She just felt like keeping that a secret?
Everything was fine up until that point. I don't know. I will say that reveal scene is one of the only good parts of that, is that, like, it was
Yes.
cool hearing the whole, like, no, there's 5 crew members.
It doesn't make
And
sense, but yes.
It doesn't make
Yeah,
sense the
in
way that she
isolation,
delivered
that's a
those
cool
lines,
reveal.
but it makes it scarier.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting. There's kind of the element of, like, he was definitely there longer than we knew because they thought that Trey was the one that detached the airlock, and it was clearly Pinbacker if it was anybody. Which is another part of the reason why the insanity theory doesn't really work, because Trey didn't detach the airlock. He was, in a vegetative state. And then, he died. It felt almost like I don't know if you guys saw Passengers, but Passengers did this. Where you feel like there needs to be like a big crazy ending set piece, so things
I think I
kind of...
vaguely heard about it.
Yeah, it basically the ending of the movie doesn't really fit in with like what the rest of the movie is about. Like it's a lot more like personal and like sort of psychological in the rest of the movie, and then the ship's gonna blow up and crash or whatever.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, type deal. So it's one of those like...
Well, now
big...
I want to see it. That's sarcasm. I'm sorry.
You don't want to see it.
That's I was gonna say Chris Evans, Chris Pratt, and Jennifer Lawrence, right?
Yep. And I think Lawrence Fishburne's in it too.
Oh, yeah, I think he is. But, yeah, I've heard it's not great, so I have no inclination.
Next, we wanted to do sci-fi takeaways from this kind of like mini trilogy that we've now done. Evan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. I have 2 little lessons and 1 big one. First little lesson, embrace what's unique about your story world. I think all 3 of the movies we've talked about do that pretty well. In some places they could do it better. Again, I think the third act of this is probably the place where that's lacking the most, but the others, like, show us the inside of the black hole, do, like, cool time dilation stuff on the water planet, and in Snowpiercer, show us the whole train. And even in this, like, one of my favorite scenes in this movie is going out on the solar shield thing. That's something that only this movie can do. And I think that's worth doing in sci-fi. And other stuff too, but especially when you're doing, like, a high concept premise. Other mini lesson, don't be afraid to give us exposition early. I think all 3 movies that we've talked about do a good job at that. But also they do well making it interesting and wrapping it in conflict so it doesn't feel super dense. That holds true, I think, pretty much throughout. I don't remember any... we talked about like some of the bumpier exposition with Snowpiercer, but I feel like Interstellar and Sunshine are a lot better. I don't feel like there's any bumpy exposition here. And then my big takeaway is take time to focus on your character story. I feel like just because of the genre, you should probably come up with your premise first and like figure out the rules of your world. And then once you're done with that, you got to find the right characters and the right like character story and journey to fit with it. You can have a cool sci-fi world and that can be enough, I think, but it's really best like Interstellar, I think, works better than the other two because that's a really strong character story at the heart of it, and it's the right one to go with that premise. Whereas I think, Jelani, what you were breaking down with your topic here, like, that could be a good character story for this premise. They just don't fully deliver on it. And Snowpiercer, I don't think does especially like well or badly with that, but I think it's an easy thing to get lost when your world building is such a big aspect of it. You still want there to be emotional resonance. I know I've found that difficult when I've dipped into sci-fi. You're excited about the world of it, but you gotta populate it with compelling characters too. And it's partly harder because it almost always has to be the second step or a later one at least. But I think it's important. Those are my lessons.
My lessons: the science doesn't have to be checked, but bonus points if it is. Follow through on your premise, like Evan was saying. Show us the whole train, please. And thank you. Keep the tone consistent. The big buy of your science fiction is already enough. If you aren't going to keep it consistent, find a way to ease the audience into the tonal shift or tease it very early. You're my last one. Don't kill off Chris Evans, please and thank you.
Over 2 on this one.
Both movies, he dies in both movies we have in this trilogy.
I mean, for all we know, he dies off screen in Interstellar too, and we just don't see him, which would be a sin.
He was Anne Hathaway's love interest.
Oh, right, Dr. Edmund Wolf.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were gonna do both, but they're like, we can't do a Matt Damon cameo and a Chris Evans cameo in this. The theater will explode.
Well, not yet. Now Nolan's just throwing everyone into his movies. It's like, oh, Casey Affleck's here. Oh, hey, here's Brandon Fraser or whoever. Wait, no, he's not
That's
in
true.
Oppenheimer. Who is it? Rami Malek.
My lessons are kind of quick. Balance both elements well. I feel like balancing, like, character and the sci-fi world building well makes for the best movie. Like Interstellar, I will say does that very well, where we get a lot of good setup for the world, but a lot of stuff is also done through the lens of the characters. Kind of get the same with Snowpiercer, where we're kind of experiencing a lot of the world through them. It keeps us grounded in it, and it doesn't make it feel like, we're having everything explained to us, and then we start the story, like 10 minutes in.
It's such a tricky thing to do as a writer. When
It is, yeah.
you have a world that's lived in and you don't have, like, there's no logical reason for a fish out of water character. Or you're not in a school setting where you have, like, a history class being taught.
Which is why disguising it as something like conflict or, even just coming up with a plan is very helpful. That's why, like, Sunshine, I like a lot of the exposition in this because it's a lot of them going over what's possible and what's not for their mission, using their different expertise. That's a very good way of doing it and balancing it, which is why in certain cases, like, having a collection of experts as your characters can be very helpful, especially when they're, like, kind of going on a mission. And there are other cases, too, where, like, you can have somebody who's, like, an expert in stuff that is put into a new situation. We were bringing up Annihilation before, or Evan, you were, where,
Yeah.
like, Annihilation, she is an expert in, like, biology and stuff, but she doesn't know what the shimmer is, right? So characters do have to kind of explain it to her, but we're also experiencing elements of it through her experience, too. So it's not all exposition. The exposition that is there fits in organically. So yeah, it's very tricky to do, but I think when you can strike that balance, you don't want it to be too far to one side or the other. Like, I love Looper, right? But Looper has a little too much world building in there in some cases where they add in too many elements and it kind of unbalances things. You know?
Yeah, some of it is like I feel like part of the thing with exposition is like you got to scale your world building. Sometimes if you make it too dense, like your audience is just going to be lost. But if you can,
you cannot reveal everything.
Yeah,
I'm not even revealing everything in my. Sorry, I keep bringing it back to my series. I'm not even revealing a lot of stuff in the first book. Like, you're gonna stress people out.
To point to something I just recently rewatched, like Dune Part 2, I really love because the first
No
movie.
spoilers.
No, I won't spoil. I'm going to be very general about it. But, like, that movie, I feel like, gets to be everything that I wanted from the first movie because we got to, like, take off and we know what the world is at this point. So the first movie is kind of. It's there for more than just world building. But you can't build it out as much as you need to for all the elements that are used in the second movie. Like, that would be too much for one movie. And it's a lot in the first one. It's pretty dense. But
Yeah, I'm still getting. The Fremen are the blue-eyed people, right?
yeah. To point to another Alex Garland example that I think does what you were talking about a minute ago, Angel, I think it does a good job of bring in somebody who has knowledge. Because Caleb in that movie is kind of the audience POV character, but he's also a lot more knowledgeable about AI and code and, like, what's the name of the test they do in that movie?
Turing test, yeah.
Yeah, like he knows what a Turing
like, he
test
gets the
is.
whole premise of the idea and sort of the kind of questions to ask. So you buy when he's just kind of like, you trust him to ask those questions and they make sense.
And he's asking questions that are, like, probably smarter and more, like, or at least, like, require more of a basis of knowledge than the audience has. But he's also able to, like, Alex Garland has him do that in a way where your average person who doesn't have coding background is not unmoored. They can still stick along for the ride. What other takeaways did you have?
That was my main one. I actually do want to make a point about Ex Machina also, now that you brought it up, because I was just thinking about this. One way that they do that really well, too, is, like, even though Oscar Isaac is also a computer expert, and, like, obviously he invented all of these things, right? And they could be talking to each other in, like, a way that nobody would understand, but they use Oscar Isaac's character specifically to bring it back to the emotion. Like, so many times they'll be having these conversations, and, you know, he's answering Caleb's questions about all these things. So we're getting that world building element as far as, like, the sci-fi stuff goes. But in the end, he always wants to bring it back, but how does she make you feel? And then that grounds the movie emotionally, too. So
he's
he
always
doesn't
bringing
even
it back
really
to, like, a super simple question about just,
exactly, like
what's
just
this
baseline,
interaction
just
like?
stop overthinking it and just what is your thought right at this moment right now? And that makes it feel like we're watching a story as opposed to watching like a science expo presentation.
That movie
you
is
know?
a masterclass in exposition, I think.
hmm Yeah, and they cut a lot out of it too. I think the original script, the helicopter scene was a lot longer, and there was all kinds of exposition between the helicopter pilot and Caleb, like basically over explaining who Oscar Isaac's character is and you know why Caleb is going there. And instead they just leaned into the line of like we've been flying over his estate for the last 2 hours. You get so much from that in that he's isolated, they're all alone out there, and he is so rich that he has this much land surrounding his house that he just owns. It's so well done.
For some of his faults, he does exposition well. And I want to talk about Civil War. I put that on the list of future episodes after
Same.
watching
I'd love
this,
to do that one.
That was a good movie from last year.
I liked it
Yeah.
for the most part.
Are we good to move into the boilerplates?
His eye looks like a moon.
Yeah.
Who? Cillian Murphy? And let me... Right there. My finger's getting lost.
Yeah.
There.
No, yep, you're pointing at it. You're good.
Yeah.
I think that's on purpose.
I think it could be. I liked doing this sci-fi run. I think we should hold off from doing another for a while, but I would do this again.
Oh yeah.
And I think we should be deliberate about like a topic for it next time if we can.
crazy premises. You got to do it in time for that.
I got to do in time somehow. So, our upcoming episodes, we have a decent amount of stuff coming up soon. So, our next 2 regular podcast episodes, Jelani is going to finally have us talk about Clue, which I feel like we've been talking about for years. My next pick is going to be Mulan.
The live action one, not the cartoon one, guys.
Evan said it's his favorite movie.
If you're not picking up on the sarcasm, if you're new here, no, we are watching... That movie does not get to be called Mulan. In my house, we call it Mullen, because it is not worthy of the title of one of the best animated movies ever. We will be covering the good one, the animated one, with the songs.
The one with the talking dragon, I don't know how that could be good. You know, that just seems childish. The one where the main character has flaws? I don't understand how that could be a good movie.
We'll probably inevitably have to talk about it, but okay, I can't get into that. I'll get too angry. 2 other things that are coming up. This episode sort of arbitrarily marks what I'm calling the end of season 6, which means that as soon as I get this edited, we will soon after that be putting out our season 6 Tangents episode on Patreon. It is going to be a long one this year. It's probably going to be close to 4 hours. But that's partly because we've done a lot of episodes this year. There are some long tangents in there, but there's some pretty good ones.
You're saying I gotta take a break in the middle of it, like the Snyder Cut?
Well, I put in the breaks because I add all the music in there. Plus, you don't got to do it in one sitting. So there's that, and then hopefully by the time the next podcast comes out, there will be a new video essay. I've been working on a new trend video that's almost done about the IP crossover mashup trend. I didn't
know you were doing this one. Oh wait, yes I did.
Yeah, I've been working on it for a while because I had to restart my flash drive.
Ready Player One in that?
Yep, it's like Ready Player One, the Lego movies, and because I had to restart, I added in Deadpool and Wolverine because it belongs in there. Space Jam 2, not 1. And then both the Wreck-It Ralph's, Free Guy, and then Emoji Movie, kind of. Yeah, I mean, I talk about it. Oh, and what are the other 2? Pixels.
I was going to say Pixels. Is Pixel one?
Pixels and then Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. I might be forgetting a couple there, but it's all those.
Oh, Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
I allude to that. I don't really talk about it. I mention it. It's just not... It's so old that I don't count it as part of the trend.
Oh, it's part of the... Okay.
Yeah. In like a... Because you're right, like it absolutely counts, but because it's so long ago, it didn't really like kick off
just
the
like
trend.
Start a trend. Yeah, gotcha.
But yeah, all of those movies, you don't have to have seen all of them. In fact, there's about 5 of them that I highly recommend you do not see. They're pretty bad, and I chose not to rewatch some of them. I did see all of them, but I chose not to rewatch about 4 of them in preparing. But I hope it'll be a good essay. It should be about 30 minutes. I'll be putting some teaser images of that out between when this episode drops and when it drops. That'll be coming. So we have our YouTube channel with all the podcasts and our video essays. We've got our Patreon, bunch of watch-alongs on there and bonus episodes. And like I said, the Tangents episode will be coming soon. The Tangents really are worth it alone. I feel like we make it more than worth your time there.
We had another one here.
Yeah. I wouldn't say this was like one of our more entertaining ones, but that might not be the worst thing because sometimes our entertaining ones go very, very long. So, but there's plenty of those. I've been listening back to them and editing. There's some fantastic ones this season.
Do you remember any that's like the farthest you can remember from one point to the other?
No, I didn't really track the like start to end with them like that, but maybe I'll leave it to you to track that if you can when you listen through it. Finishing out, we've got our Instagram and we're on Blue Sky. Both of those are at INTAnalysisPod. I am on Letterboxd, Blue Sky, and Instagram at ev_wes. Where are you guys at?
Instagram, Jelani T. Kelly. YouTube, Jelani T. Kelly. Actors Access, Jelani T. Kelly.
I'm on Instagram at AngelsArc15. Blue Sky, I believe, is the same one, but I have not used it yet. So,
I follow you on there.
I don't have much. Yeah, I know you follow me on there. I think you do, and a couple other people we know do. But I haven't actually like posted anything or really used it yet, so I have to do that. what else? Oh, I'm on Letterboxd at Serenity Cinema, and I probably weirdly post on there the most. So
Same for me. Yep. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with us through the cycle or the season, whichever. Or if you're new, thanks for showing up. And we'll see you next time in season 7.
Don't look directly into the sun.
Definitely don't do that.
this will happen to you.